Good Sunday morning. I'm Shannon Sims.
And I'm Charles Benson. Welcome to 4-1 Forward.
From today's TMJ4, this is 4-1 Forward.
It may be the toughest job in Milwaukee, and the guy who has held it for 10 years is ready to retire.
Milwaukee Police Chief Edward Flynn is moving on from Milwaukee after leading a department that has seen its challenges and accomplishments.
10 years. A lot has happened. Much has been accomplished. Much has been achieved. It's a good benchmark. And it's time. Time to say thank you. Time to say goodbye.
Well, it's been a few days since the police chief made his big announcement, and he has agreed to sit down for his first one-on-one TV interview with us after that big decision.
Chief Flynn, welcome back to 4-1 Forward. Okay, Milwaukee's been home for you for 10 years. 3 words describe how that experience has been for you.
Ooh. Just 3.
Yes, right. I'm not used to only giving short answers. It's been a remarkable experience. It's been overwhelmingly gratifying. It's really been the pinnacle of my professional career.
Yeah, certainly one would agree, the toughest job in the city. When you look and when you become reflective, well, let me ask you first, why now? Was there a timing, was there a point that something hit you that said, this is the time?
Well, in all sincerity, when I was sworn in for my 3rd term, I pointedly, whenever asked, didn't commit to fulfilling the term. Because that's always the first question. Are you going to stay for full 4 years? I remember when I was sworn in the first time, all the speculation was, are you going to stay?
Right.
You know, of course, for some people now it's, when are you leaving? but initially, you know, that was certainly the speculation. So I was careful about that because mentally I thought 10 years would be the good benchmark. 2.5 terms, that's a good, solid decade. And given the fact that of the 79 major city chiefs, only 3 have longer service in their department than I do, it's a heck of a longevity record. And I particularly wanted to see if we could do a turnaround on the homicide numbers. We had 146 the last year of my 2nd term. I so wanted to make an impact on that. First year we still had 142. Last year with that 17% decline, still much higher than the average had been under my tenure, but absolutely in the right direction. So I thought, okay, we've gotten to the 10 years. Across the board, we've had crime decreases in 2017 compared to 2016. Perfect timing.
Milwaukee is an interesting place. You mentioned that you wanted to bring those homicide numbers down, and we have seen a decline. What do you credit that to?
I'm not going to credit it to anything right now. I mean, there's a variety of things have to take place. Obviously, we've got strong community partnerships at the neighborhood level that are actively working with the youth of our community, places like the Boys and Girls Clubs, places like the Northcott Community House, you know, places like the Safe and Sound Initiative. So that's going on. We've really spent 10 years perfecting our crime analysis and our ability to deploy in response to that, and our ability to analyze networks of offenders and reach out to those offenders that have the highest rate of offending, and by aiming at the high rate locations and high rate offenders having an impact. And you know, partnerships with places like Sojourner Family Peace that helps us on the homicide prevention front when it comes to domestic violence. So you know, there's an array of connections and partnerships and technologies that I think have been helpful.
We said challenges and accomplishments. What was the toughest part of the job, day to day?
Well, I think it, you know, initially we had an awful lot of momentum because across the board there was desire to change. There was desire for change inside the organization. They recognized they'd fallen behind the times in some ways, that they'd been buffeted by some controversies. Certainly I have been. It's, you know, it's endemic to the job.
Change what? The thinking, how to run the department?
Culture.
Part of it was the organizational culture, the notion of what's possible. The department had become very defensive over the last several years because of a couple of high-profile incidents. Again, as I said, they can happen to any chief, but nonetheless, I think the shift from the Breyer years through the Areola and Jones and Hagerty years, there was a gradual attrition of people that were strongly connected to the old Milwaukee police culture. So part of that was a generational shift in both who was getting promoted. I had an opportunity to make a lot of promotions and command the promotions, and who was getting hired. Younger people with different attitudes towards society, policing, and so on. So taking advantage of a generational change and pushing, you know, cultural changes, you know, leadership opportunities, technological change, I threw a lot at them. And we made some serious progress. But inevitably we hit those individual crises, and they can do much to retard the process and undermine confidence.
And you made a lot of decisions for the department that not everyone agreed with, rank and file and community. However, you did show that you represented the core responsibilities that the department had to the community, especially when we look at some of the high-profile situations with 2 of your officers involved in police-involved shootings and the decisions you made to let them go. Again, that was in line with what you had set in front for the department as far as core responsibility, correct?
Yes. I mean, one of the challenges for the profession, and I think it's one of the sources of great frustration to the community, is how to hold officers accountable for both misconduct and incompetence. They're not the same thing. Okay, misconduct is motivated by ill will or greed. Incompetence is a dreadful error that can result in a horrible consequence. Since the profession over the years has relied on the criminal justice system to make the decision, very frequently incompetent acts go unpunished because they weren't truly criminal in terms of proving criminal intent and so on. The public says, well, there's no justice and no peace. And my firm belief was that if we could demonstrate, A, that we knew the distinction between the two, because cops have to know that we recognize the difference if they err versus they cross the line and want to break the law. But if we could demonstrate to the public firm consequences for incompetence that ends up in serious, dreadful consequences for the public, that gradually, perhaps, and this is a gradual national trend in policing now, I think that actually started here, perhaps the demands to put people cops in jail for screwing up, basically, will attenuate if the public is confident that we're taking strong action when people are wrong.
You talk about being a change agent. Did you feel like being the outsider helped you do that or make it harder for you?
I think it it made it harder for me in terms of the external environment because I didn't have any external automatic allies except those who were politically here when I was. But they often move on and then new people come in and that shifts. It helped me internally because when you're brought in from outside, no clique of the department wins. Okay? There's no consequences for collaborators. Okay? No one is punished or exiled for having aligned with the wrong group. The other thing is within every organization there are what I call inside outsiders. They're in the organization, they're of the organization, they care about the organization, they know the organization's got to shift and change with the times. And I was blessed by being able to identify a number of those people, and that's what really facilitated and moved the change process forward.
All right,
Great sign of leadership.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Ed Flynn is the longest serving police chief in Milwaukee since Harold Breyer's days in the 60s and 70s and early 80s.
So we're going to look back on one day on the job that speaks to the challenges Chief Flynn faced every day.
And also, you'll meet 2 MPS students who will be celebrating today for their creative interpretation of the works of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Chief Flynn is known as a data-driven chief who believes in community policing.
But being police chief also has its burdens, and perhaps one of Chief Flynn's most poignant moments came after a Ruckus Fire and Police Commission meeting to talk about the fatal shooting of Dontre Hamilton.
Flynn was at that meeting when he learned by phone about a little girl named Layla Peterson who had been shot and killed while in her home by gun-carrying criminals.
Here's how the chief responded when people questioned why he was looking at his phone during this heated meeting.
The greatest racial disparity in the city of Milwaukee is getting shot and killed. Hello. 80% of my homicide victims every year are African American. 80% of our aggravated assault victims are African American. 80% of our shooting victims who survived their shooting are African American. Now, they know all about the last 3 people that have been killed by the Milwaukee Police Department over the course of the last several years. There's not one of them can name one of the last 3 homicide victims we've had in this city. Now, there's room for everybody to participate in fixing this police department, and I'm not pretending we're without sin. But this community is at risk, all right. And it's not because men and women in blue risk their lives protecting it. It's at risk because we got large numbers of high-capacity, quality firearms in the hands of remorseless criminals who don't care who they shoot. Now, I'm leaving here to go to that scene. And I take it personally, okay?
Chief, I thought that may have been one of your toughest days, a hard day for you. And I think it speaks to the challenges you faced. Do you agree?
Yes, because it really kind of summed up everything.
Yeah.
Sure.
You know, it summed up the terrible toll violence is taking on the young in this community. And it really nailed me when I found out she was sitting on her grandfather's lap and she's the same age as one of my grandchildren at the time.
I can see it still hitting you here today.
Really got me. And the other piece was, the meeting I was in summed up all of the stresses that we're dealing with right now. Every critical incident can undermine years of neighborhood-based work to try to improve the trust and legitimacy of the police department. And when I was running off those statistics about disparate victimization, I'm not throwing rocks blaming disadvantaged communities for their, victimization rates, all right? It's the symptom of poverty the police deals with is violent crime.
Sure.
But what's frustrating to me is the self-styled activists and the vast majority of the politicians would rather seize on the one component of the equation, which is police activity, and leave totally unaddressed the bigger societal issue, which is the interlocking series of disadvantages of which serious violent crime is one. And you cannot understand what we're trying to do in terms of whatever disparities we generate in our activity if you don't acknowledge the goodwill we have in trying to deal with these terrible violence disparities. And that's the essence of the frustration right now.
Let's talk about that, because what I think a lot of times people feel, especially in the media sometimes, that you have to come out on the defense. But what is it that the community misses in your commitment and your passion to Milwaukee that may not always translate when you're in that rough situation like you were, and we don't see the, no disrespect, the human side of what it is you are trying to communicate to those?
Well, and what my officers are trying to do every day. 3 days ago or a week ago, the NICS squad, those 2 young officers, bail out of their car, crawl into a car, and pull unconscious young men out of a burning vehicle. Now, the first line of the story wasn't 2 white officers just saved the lives of 3 young black men. It was 2 police officers saved 3 young people.
As
and
it
that's
should
as
be.
it should be, absolutely. But if it had been a shooting, it would have, and implicit in that observation would be there's something wrong.
But you can't deny that we have an issue in Milwaukee of racism, of segregation that we unfortunately do not address on a daily basis.
I absolutely agree, but the challenge is much of that segregation is economically driven, and the overwhelming disadvantages of those communities afflict every service agency, including the police.
No doubt.
And so what I'm saying is when you're trying to view our activities, applying gross census data to that is so wrong when we are actively engaged with the most needy communities at their request. And I just want an expansive discussion of both. Yes, we need to be fair and impartial and respectful. Yes, we need to be effective. Yes, we have to worry about inappropriate disparities, but we have to look at these disparities over here and say, okay, what are we doing? And perhaps I'm seeing some movement now. This Office of Violence Prevention, there seems to be a little bit more animated discussion about the community piece, so I'm hoping we can start to move that dialogue past, pointing fingers.
Well, we want to turn to a lighter moment as you head into retirement. We reached out to a guy who knows a little bit about retirement, Mike Jacobs. He has some free advice from you.
Oh, how nice.
Hi, Chief. Congratulations on your retirement, and thank you for your dedicated service to the community. 10 years, tough job. You did it well. I think you're going to like retirement. I know I sure do. Basically, stress levels come way down. You get to do mostly what you want, and you don't have to do the things you don't want to do. So my very best wishes for a happy retirement.
Some good advice there?
Excellent advice from one former stress addict, and one
Yeah.
former stress and adrenaline addict to another. So, okay, I'll take that advice.
Chief, we do want to
yeah.
say, though, both. We appreciate your service. We admire the fact that you want to have that dialogue, and you have always been present to have that dialogue.
Thank you very much, Shannon. Thanks
for being here.
Appreciate it.
All right, coming up, what's next for the Milwaukee Police Department?
And who will replace Chief Flynn?
It is up to the Fire and Police Commission to hire the next chief of the Milwaukee Police Department.
But others will want a voice in that process, including Common Council President Ashanti Hamilton, who's joining us this morning. Ashanti, what were your thoughts on the process that F&P decided on the choosing of an interim chief?
Well, I really wanted them to open up the process. I think that I really appreciate them taking ownership of this opportunity to be able to kind of broaden the scope. And it's important for us to understand what our roles are as we go through this process, because the statutory responsibility of being able to do this search lies squarely with the Fire and Police Commission. I want the council, community members, the mayor to kind of to respect that.
Okay.
That responsibility. But what we want to be able to do is to allow the voices of the people that we represent to be able to magnify those voices with the commission so that they would be responsive to the needs and the concerns of people that live in the community.
Sure.
Can you describe the type of police chief you want? We had Chief Flynn for 10 years. Are there things within Chief Flynn you said, let's duplicate that and try to find some others?
I want us to recognize what works, right? Okay. And I think there are certain things that many people in the community have recognized that they like about Chief Flynn, right? And I hate to, when we're in a situation like this, you know, there are so many folks that were fans of his and many critics. But one thing is for sure is that if you last in the city for 10 years, you were obviously doing something right.
That's part of your
legacy.
There
was something,
right?
Yeah. And one of those things that I think that should be carried on is the willingness to look at the big picture, to understand the role of law enforcement and being able to create stable communities, and understand that that's operating in conjunction with a lot of other things that's happening, whether it's economics, whether it's how do you build police community relations, what are the type of examples nationally that you're willing to implement in order to build that. And I think that some of the things like the BURN grant that we did and Building Neighborhood Capacity grants that the police department was the lead on in bringing those resources in, there are many examples in that on how to do police community relations that I think should be duplicated and carried on. I think the community is looking for someone who embraces that type of effort within communities. So that's a must.
And that can be anyone who is from Milwaukee or outside of Milwaukee. Would you agree? I
would agree that is capable. I mean, the person that I think helped us to understand how to implement that came from outside.
That's true.
Right?
So one thing that could be added to the equation, what needs to be part of the new chief's job or responsibilities?
Well, one of the things is that there must be a recognition that it's not one person at the head that kind of creates this change with the relationship. It's frontline officers that do that work. And so whatever that philosophy is that's in the police department, there needs to be a way to be able to have that philosophy trickle down throughout the department so that frontline officers also carry that mentality.
And I think that was something that was depicted in the DOJ's draft report, that there was not a sense of community policing definition that from sergeants on down to officers could agree on or knew. It was there, but it just was not there consistently. So I do see your point is that has to come from leadership, but then it also has to trickle down into the rank and file.
Absolutely. It can't just be an initiative in a particular neighborhood. This has to be a way that the department operates. And that's a philosophical position that needs to, it starts at the head, but you have to be able to implement that throughout the department.
We have about 30 seconds left. What do you think the timeline will be here and should be here to get someone permanently in that position?
Well, some of this depends on the need.
Sure.
Right? We may have some very capable folks that are within the department right now that can actually fill the void for some time.
For now.
For some time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, you think, okay.
Who could carry?
Who could carry? I mean, there's 2 years left on
and
this,
that's going to be a decision
contract.
that the Fire and Police Commission
And this is a decision that's on the Fire and Police Commission, which is one of the things that I think that they need to take a closer look at. And since they are going to be the ones that will be looking at the backgrounds and the qualifications of the people coming forward, I'm hoping that there would be an analysis done as to what qualifications we have in-house and how long should that person be in order to do a search.
All right.
We're going to have to leave it at that. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
And we'll be right back. As part of a contest, MPS students were recently asked to interpret Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s works through art, speech, and writing.
Jeremy Dunk introduces us to 2 of the winners.
I stand for peace, fairness, for love, justice, the weak, the fearful, the strong. My name is Tara Nerby Walker, and I go to Golda Meir Upper Campus. We will not become fearful or silent. The theme was take a stand for truth and justice, and Dr. King stood for equality, he stood for peace, he stood for fairness. I was like, wow, this man is amazing, and he never would ever fight to solve a problem. He would use his words.
Around it, I just repeated the words over in white paint. stand up for truth and justice. My name is Ratana Chandara. I am 13 years old. I attend Milwaukee School of Languages and different cultures around the world. I felt like his words triggered something in me. I'm like, I should do something to help with the bullying and all the problems in our world. Like, I can do something. It just inspired me to break out from my shell, kind of, just to get out to the world and express my feelings. He did many memorable things. He's just a great leader. He had a really strong voice, and it overpowered everyone, and it got people's attention.
Hundreds of people of all races. So I want to be able to speak outside of the speech contest, away from people who understand what Dr. King stood for and why he stood for it, and go to people that don't really understand as much or need some kind of push in that direction. Whatever your talent is, you can somehow give a message through it. No matter what it is, you can somehow give Dr. King's message through it. He showed it through his speeches and his words, and the message is just amazing to me. This is what it's all about. I'm so proud of my culture and where I come from. I like to give messages and hopefully do it the same way that Dr. King did, without any trouble, just through his words and just his words.
Great job by those kids.
Yes, thank you for joining us on 4-1 Forward. We'll see you next Sunday.